Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2024 release, The J-Horror Virus. It's a Shudder exclusive documentary, and it's coming to Shudder on Monday, November 4th. Kind of odd. They usually do Fridays. This is a Monday. But this is coinciding with them on the exact same day, dumping a bunch of J-Horror on the streaming service, which I don't remember them putting a lot of J-Horror on Shudder in quite some time. At least since I've actually had Shudder, so this is pretty interesting. You can watch this documentary and then you can watch a bunch of these films. A lot they actually end up talking about and showing clips of in the documentary. So I think it's a great idea to do it that way. This is directed by Sarah Appleton, who did The Found Footage Phenomenon, which I thought was a pretty solid documentary. Also did Damaged and Generation Terror, and Jasper Sharp, who did The Creeping Garden and a segment of Sex and Death that I believe is on Netflix. Again, Shudder exclusive, coming Monday, November 4th. Don't need to give much of a synopsis because literally it's just a documentary about J-horror. It interviews a bunch of people who are kind of scholars on it. It interviews people who were actually involved in that movement in Japan at the time. So this is a primarily subtitled film. There are some people who end up throwing things in who are speaking in English, but it's a very small amount. I'd say probably if you want to break it down by percentage, 90% of this is probably in Japanese with subtitles. So if you can't handle subtitles, this won't necessarily be for you. But if you can handle subtitles, I would say give it a shot. It is interesting. Yeah. So the intro of it, I think, is quintessential J-horror. You'll see what I mean when you watch it. At the very beginning, it's a bunch of images that just make you immediately just start to think, oh, J-horror. One J-horror film in particular, which actually is a very important one I learned from this documentary, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. Obviously, there are a bunch of clips of J-horror films throughout this. I mean, I don't think you're going to have a good documentary without having a bunch of clips of films in there. So they hit a lot of these, and I always find that a lot of fun because not only are a lot of these films being referenced by the people who are being interviewed, but you can just sit there and watch and see certain clips of these, and then to the viewer, it's kind of like, ooh, that looks interesting. What's going on in that scene? What film is that from? Obviously, they'll have the little title card on there showing what film the clip is from, so then you can just kind of type it into your phone. Hey, this is one I want to save for later. Definitely want to get to this one. So there were a few films that came up in this that I've never even heard about. So it's pretty great for going a little bit deeper into J-horror, especially if you think you kind of know the J-horror genre, but then you watch this documentary and you're going to find out you don't really know it. So yeah. They talk about shared imagery, which is a very interesting topic that they have in here between a bunch of these films. You know, not only do they talk about kind of the origin of where a lot of this mythology and the scare aspect in Japanese culture ends up coming from a lot of these films, but they talk about kind of shared imagery that happens between a lot of these films, because one of the other things is that a lot of the people who are involved in the J-horror movement in Japan actually went to the same school and actually knew each other. A lot of these people were in the same circle, and so a lot of these ideas kind of got passed around. So it starts to make a lot more sense when you're watching these J-horror films and you're being like, oh, this is very similar, this is very similar. Some of the kind of subtext that they put in there is very similar. Some of the imagery is almost exactly the same in certain ways. And like I said, you know, not only does it make sense because of who these people were and their interconnectedness, but also kind of the mythology and the Japanese culture aspects that they were borrowing from, because they were all doing the same ones. There is also plenty said about Japanese history and culture that is believed to have influenced J-horror films. That was one of the most interesting aspects of it myself, because being an American watching films like this, you don't understand what made these popular in Japan necessarily, because you're not a part of that culture. So when they break it down and let you know why that is, including some of these people who actually were the filmmakers who made these films, you get a good idea of why they did what they did and how they tried to connect with the Japanese audience. And then happily, in their opinion, it got further than that, and it became an international success, which, you know, you get from the interviews with them. They didn't expect this to happen. And actually, at that point, one of the interesting things I found in the documentary is at that point, the Japanese cinema or Japanese film industry wasn't doing that great. It was primarily people going to the theater to see American films, films from other countries, and then sometimes people were checking out Japanese films. But when J-horror started in Japan, it really hit a nerve with the audience there, and it blew up the Japanese film industry, really. And so people in Japan were going specifically to theaters to see Japanese made films when they previously really weren't. So very interesting stuff you learn like that. They trace some of the film influences for the overall genre, which is interesting since I was unaware of some of them. It's not only like a cultural thing or like a historical thing, but also kind of like what was going on in culture at that time that were kind of fears and anxieties of society. And that's obviously something that horror films do all the time. But again, it's very interesting to get it from the Japanese perspective. Because again, you know, as an American watching these films, you interpret it through your American brain. You interpret it through whatever your life experiences were. I've never grown up in Japan. I don't know a whole lot about Japan, except what I see in people's YouTube videos, people who are, you know, living there from the United States. And it seems interesting to me, but I'm not living in it, so I can't, like, connect in that way with these films. Unfortunately, the audio isn't always great in these interviews. I think one of the weird choices that they made, and it was an aesthetic choice, is some of the settings of where they chose to interview these people. They have them in these kind of like basement, empty hall looking type settings. And I get it, so because it connects to a lot of the films from an aesthetic point, but the audio doesn't sound good. There's an echo to a lot of these interviews, and I think it was a very poor audio choice for the documentary, and it does become annoying. So I think that they really probably should have thought that through a little bit more, in my opinion. That's one of the big issues I have with it. There also are some interview clips that don't add much, and they really could have, and actually I would argue should have been cut out of this. The film is only just slightly over an hour and a half, which, you know, obviously fine. But you don't have to be in an hour and a half. I think they really should have cut some of these clips down because there's literally, just to give an example, there's one interview where they're talking to the woman who I believe it was who played Sadako from Ring, and she was just basically saying, like, the whole interview clip was just basically her being like, oh yeah, the movie was being made and they reached out to me and asked me to be Sadako and I said yes. Like, that was it. Like, you don't need that clip at all. So there were, I wouldn't say a bunch, but there were some clips like that where you watch and you're just like, why is this in here? Like, if for nothing other than filler, like, what is this in here for? You're not adding anything to this conversation. So I think they needed to be a little more selective with what they were and were not putting in this film. I think that also goes a little bit to their interviewing, that it seemed like maybe they weren't as prepared as they could have or should have been when it came to questioning for these interviews. But then at the same time, I don't know also, do these individuals speak Japanese themselves? Was there a language barrier, and were they using an interpreter? So, like, what was that type of issue? Because there could have been some issue there with, like, asking questions versus what you end up getting answer-wise because of that language barrier. I don't know. But it came off to me as not being fully prepared with good enough questions to really pull things out of people. Because some of the interviews really pretty mild, where it's kind of like you feel like you're not getting a whole lot, that what's being explained is just very droll in a sense. I never realized that how important the film Ring was to the Japanese film industry. That was wild to me. That's one of the very interesting things that I got from this film, is just, like, I knew it was a big success internationally, and then there was a remake in the United States, which, you know, proves even more how much of a success it was. But within the Japanese society, I didn't realize, like, what a big turning point that film was for their industry, and what it did for Japan in general. I was like, whoa, that's kind of wild to consider that a film like that had that much impact. When it's over, it does feel like there's still a lot of meat on the bone for this subject, unfortunately. Going back to what I was saying about they needed to pull more out of the people that they were interviewing. Maybe they even needed to seek out some other experts who could have kind of filled in the gaps a little bit. I still feel like there's a lot more that really did need to be covered. But then again, maybe they want to work on a part two. But that said, I do think it's a good documentary. I did enjoy it. So out of 5 stars, half stars, and play, I'd give it a 3-star rating. I think especially if you're into J-horror, this is a must-watch. If you're just kind of a little bit curious about J-horror, I also think it's a good thing to watch. If you don't care about J-horror, just don't watch it. I mean, that's all I would say. But 3 stars. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts on it. If you've watched it, go ahead and put it in the comments. And if you could do me a favor, subscribe to my channel to support me, make me feel good. If you want to financially contribute to what I'm doing here, I have links for my memberships in the description. You can check out what you get for a nominal fee. Also, I have super thanks enabled, so you can do a one-time donation if that's something you want to do. But please, if you don't feel financially secure, do not do it. Just don't do it. You can thumbs up, though, on the video to help me with that YouTube algorithm. That's free. And you can also hit the notification bell button. Then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos. But regardless, I thank you very much for watching this. I do thank you for your time. And until next time, keep it brutal.